Oh, don't worry. The Cape Crusader always has a contingency. Here's your look at the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse Batman Endgame Justice Buster. During the events of Endgame, the Joker infected Gotham City with a virus that turned the populace against Batman. The Justice League were among those infected. The codename Fenrir, Batman activated the Justice Buster to neutralize each member of the Justice League. The Justice Buster is designed for war with the most powerful heroes on the planet and equipped with the bind of veils, hyper-fast servers, frictionless fluid cannons, powdered magnesium carbonate foam, electromagnetic nerve tree, centrine neutralizer, red giant knuckles, and plasma shields. While he may not always have a plan A, you can bet that Bats has a plan B. Before we get a closer look at the Batman Endgame Justice Buster, I'd like to first thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that were kind enough to provide the sample that we could have a look at this review. I'll be also bringing in a couple of figures for comparison's sake in a second. First, though, let's grab the tape measure and see how tall the Justice Buster stands. Now, if you look at the way that the head is sculpted, it's only about 9.5. I only say like only. That's still a pretty tall figure. It's 9.5 inches in height, or it's going to be about 23 centimeters tall. As for a couple of figure comparisons, here's what it looks like with the Nightfall Batman. Here's what it looks like with the Gold Label Edition Boy Wonder Robin. Slightly bigger figures. I did also want to bring in Doomsday, so you guys probably already have Doomsday in your collection. That may also help to show you guys how big it stands. Another big figure is the mega-sized Bane. And also as well, freeing some space to the side, I did also want to bring in, sticking with Batman, I should have really brought in some League members, but I thought as well, considering this is Batman's gear after all, we bring in some Bat villains. Here's also what it looks like with the mega-sized Clayface. The accessory list for Justice Buster remains quite small, sadly. Figure only comes included, first of all, with a trading card and a display stand, and that's it. First, the trading card. Happy to report once again we're getting source material and not figure photography. I would imagine that this is pulled from the pages of Batman Endgame, where Justice Buster is charging towards us. By the way it looks, at least, it kind of looks like a mechanized version of Rhino. Different comic company, I know. Flip it around, though, to the back. The project codename is Fenrir, and then there's a paragraph read. You can read for yourself if you want. You can pretend like I'm reading it for you. I have, in fact, already read it for you. It's the same thing I read at the beginning of the review. Let's slide the card to the side. That will be going in my card sheet shortly after this review, and then the figure comes also included with a display stand. Normally, I would have looked at a figure this size, and then I would have looked at a trading card or display stand this size, and I would have just written off that this is clearly too small of a stand to fit a figure this big. But then looking at it and the way that you can actually get this guy posed in running poses, for example, the display stand actually does come rather in handy. If you look on the bottom of the figure's feet, he has 8 of them, 4 and 4. On the bottoms and the corners, you can see that there's peg holes. Just take yourself your display stand and attach it onto one of the provided 2 pegs. And then, of course, while it may look a little lost in the shuffle just by the sizing of that when you compare it with the overall size, how big this beast is of the Justice Buster, you almost think for a second, well, why would I even need to use a display stand? Well, the display stand, I found it's been helpful if you did want to, for example, get the figure in a running pose. The display stand sort of just gives it a little bit of stabilization, especially if you want to have like the figure in a running pose. Now, you have to kind of move it around and getting just the right pose in place. And if you get it right on the sweet spot, you can get the figure to be in a running pose. Now, I've done this a couple of times. It's not the easiest, granted, to do. I honestly think it would have worked better if they had used a larger, like, mega-sized stand that we've gotten, say, with the likes of the Spawn stuff, just to help really give some proper stability to this figure. I will say, though, it is doable, but obviously, while everybody's looking at me right now, I'm not going to be able to pull it off. But you can get this somewhat in a running pose. It's just not the easiest to do. So we're going to move the stand to the side for right now. I'm going to get, of course, a closer look now at the Justice Buster. I will say, like, now I have him already now in hand. I've already had this guy in hand for a while now. But I will say, like, the plastic that they've used for this is good, but it's quite hollow. Like, it's hollow in the body, Knock, knock, who's there? It's hollow in the legs, it's hollow in the lower legs, and it's hollow in the arms. Don't expect necessarily that you're going to be picking this guy up and he's going to have the sheer weight that the Clayface had, for example. Clayface was big and heavy plastic. This is kind of a little bit more of a hollow plastic. The plastic is good, but it definitely has a little bit more of a lighter feel to it. Head sculpt-wise, I think it looks quite good to the Justice Buster. I will say, though, like these little top fins that it has, it sort of mimics that of the Bat. I wish that they were a little bit higher than what they were. First, removing this from its plastic prison, I had really like the ears really low down to the face. I might just, after this review, heat the head a little bit with either hot water. I might even think it's an easier thing to probably run a few passes with the hairdryer just to soften up the plastic a little bit. And then what I might just do is put a few little things underneath it while the plastic is cooling. I don't really want the ears to be this high up, but maybe just a little bit of a space because, like I said, when I first got it out, the ears were really close to the head. And I think even in the comics, it varies a little bit. I would much rather have just a little bit of space, so I might just end up doing that. Heating this just a little bit with a hairdryer, putting like a little thing underneath it just to hold it up while the plastic cools, and maybe just have the ears just a little higher than what they are right now. Sculpting for the head sculpt, as flat as it may be, I mean, to look at it from the top, it kind of looks like an old school Logitech mouse, where I'd just be able to move it around. Metacrawler, was that the thing? I think that was one of the search places I went to when I was a kid. How many of those are even still around? I know obviously everybody goes to Google now as their go-to search site, but how many other search sites are still around? It does kind of look a little bit like, I guess it would probably be more like this. This would be the Logitech mouse. I don't know. I thought it looked a little bit like the mouse. The thing about the plastic, though, not only just being hollow, is if you look at it, the colors are a little bit off. And I think it's supposed to be like that in the comics. Like if you were to say, look at this and only gauge it solely from the way it looks here in the card, clearly there seems to be cases where like the head, for example, is a darker gray, and then like the fins or the little ears have clearly been painted or washed a little bit with a lighter coloring of gray so that they look a little bit different from the plastic around them. The same can really be said as well for the shoulders. If you look at the shoulders, the top ears, the arms, for example, are top areas of the arms, and the lower legs are all sort of that same color scheme. While what's left behind, though, is sort of kind of more this matte medium gray. The legs actually are one area that doesn't quite gel with anything else on the figure's body. Like there are like interior areas of the plastic that I guess are close enough, but like there is definitely a bit of a different departure when the grays that they've used here. The details are really good on it though. On the front, it clearly shows you who it belongs to, as there's a big bat giant symbol stretched across the front of its torso. The little touches of detail, like the little notches, the little indentations that they've added there, scratches, wear and tear, not to mention these little riveted points that they've also added there as well. If you look at it, it almost looks like it's a face, or a bird face with a little beak down below here. If you look inside what I would guess that then best describe as the eyes, there's some really nice little circuitry sculpting, try to say that 5 times fast, on the inside area of the body. I wish there was a little bit of paint though, because all the places that have some really interesting details are only kind of really left behind to the gray to kind of get the job done. Like for example, you've got these bat symbols there on the forearms, for example. If they had only added a wash of darker black, for example, it would really help to bring those details to the forefront. Same can also be said for the back here. It's got these 2 thrusters there on the back of the figure's body, but along the top here too, if they had only just gone in there and washed a little bit over it with the black, I think some of the details really would shine a lot more than what they do right now. The figure, like I said, does have some good size to him, but not a whole lot of weight. It feels really about the same sort of weight to it, maybe just as a little bit bigger of a DC multiverse figure, not to the likes of, say, Batman, like the DC Nightfall Batman probably would not be as heavy as this one, but I would say like maybe the Hush Batman would be about that same weight. It's a lot more bigger than what it actually is. It's misleadingly light. That's what I wanted to say. Now the detailing on the figure, of course, it does have the shoulder areas that stretch across the top of the torso. It does, of course, limit a little bit of the posability. So when it comes to bringing the arms out, for example, you can't quite pull off 90 degrees. I suppose while we are on the topic of articulation, actually one thing I did also want to say about the figure on mine at least, is that the top of the torso is a little on the looser side. I can't really gauge as to whether that's going to be the case with everybody that's picking up the Justice Buster for themselves, but I will say on mine at least, the torso is a little on the looser side. I wonder if I could probably just take this off. I don't even want to force this off in case I have a harder time to put this back in place, but I wonder if I could pop it off what I'm guessing to be a ball joint on the inside, take some floor polish, take something to thicken up the ball joint so I could actually put this back on and it have a slightly tighter joint. I might just end up trying to do that. But though, going back to the figure's articulation, starting first with the head sculpt, it's actually on a 2-post system. I'm going to move this up as best as I can get it. If you look at the inside of the mouse, Logitech mouse, you can see like there's a ball joint right here on the inside that attaches to the cavity of the head. But then at the bottom of it, it actually attaches in a secondary ball joint. So it's essentially like a dumbbell ball joint. There's a dumbbell, and there's a post in the middle. That allows a little bit more wiggle space when it comes to moving the head. So if you didn't want to like the idea of maybe having the head so close to the body, you can bring up just only by a little bit. Because again, like there's a ball joint and a ball joint. We covered that, I know. Head rotates though all the way around. Of course, it's pretty tight quarters when still doing that. Head looks up, or head looks up, head looks down, and also rocks back and forth as well. Now, when it comes to the upper torso, again, it's a little on the looser side, but it got full rotation, full ball joint happening there. The arms can move forward, and they can also move back. If you're thinking for a second, I'm snapping the plastic here. It seems to be like the shoulders are on ratcheted joints. So they hinge out, again, like not quite 90 degrees, but also when you bring them forward is really where you hear that ratcheted joint. They move back also as well. There is a swivel at the bicep, which is also on a ratcheted joint. And there's a single rotation, yet a very fluent rotation, where the elbow can actually bend. Not quite, I would say, at 90 degrees, but a little less than that. The only downside, unfortunately, though, is the hands. The hands on one side is a closed fist. The other hand at least has a more reaching fist or reaching hand, but none of the hands are independently articulated. Of course, to add and request that, having ball joints here, here, and here would of course increase the cost of the figure. So unfortunately, one of the trade-offs is the fact that the figure doesn't have any individual articulation on the fingers. Had a tough time getting that out. Really wish it could have been the case that they had articulated fingers, but again, for this being a retail release figure, I think we're still getting it pretty good on the sizing of him. But yeah, there's no articulation here. There's only like articulation point in the shoulder, in the bicep, single hinged elbow, and that's it for the hands. Legs do split out. You get about that far of a splits on the buster. You can take the legs, of course, and you can move them forward. You can also move them back. There is, like the arms, a swivel at the top of the thigh. There is a hinge. Now, the really interesting thing about the hinge here, I'm going to kind of move the arm out of the way here. The way the hinge system works is there's a hinge right here for the knee, so already it moves back and forth this way. But then there's this section right here that if you bring it down, for example, you can see that there's a secondary hinge. So right here, there's a hinge. So there's one here, and there's one here that allows the foot to move this way, right? But then on the back, there's a secondary hinge that allows it to also hinge. If you bring this up, you can hinge it this way. Does that make any sense? I hope it does. So there's one here, and like the one on the front seems to be a different hinge than the one that's on the back. And again, like you can move these back and forth as well. It sort of does, I guess, in a way, lock everything in place, and you just bring that up, it unlocks it. There's a very mild swivel back and forth for the ankles, and like the hands, there's no articulation for the feet. You can't move them around. But all in all, it's a good-looking figure. I had tried so badly in the beginning of this review to try to get this guy to stand. Promise, I did get this guy to stand. There we go. You can get him in a balancing pose. I suppose it probably would help even more if you got yourself a display stand. It is possible to get it in a running pose. Now, obviously, you may want to even have something further from this. You may want to even have it balancing and resting against something, because I don't know if you'd really want to have it in a running pose like this all the time. Simply just because, again, like without anything really holding it underneath here, the likelihood of it falling over would be still pretty quite high. The figure, though, as a whole, I really do like the way that this one turned out. I like the design of the Justice Buster in the cartoon, or in the comics. It kind of, in a way, reminded, it really is, like it's a bad version of the Hulk Buster, essentially. But it really is an interesting looking design. Now, we did get one of these before. I think it was also part of the DC Universe Wave, the DC one that we got from Mattel from before. I don't actually have that figure anymore. But I'm really liking the one that we got here from McFarlane's team. The colors, again, are a little off. Again, when you're kind of looking at the colors of the thighs, for example, they jive okay with the waist, and they jive okay with the shoulders. But like the colors seem a little on the off side. And of course, I think from a color standpoint, really what would have enriched the overall sculpting of what already is a great looking figure, had they only added a little bit of a wash to the figure. It has on its forearms just only a little bit. It has on its legs just only by a little bit. It's kind of more of a lighter gray that they've added in there. But I would have done even further than that. If they had only added just a darker wash, I think they could have really done a great job of showcasing all the work and all the sculpting and all the time that they put in the figure in the first place. Having this guy in this pose like this, good idea. Having this guy in this pose like this, spinning around on a rotisserie, though, probably a bad idea. So we're going to make things quick before, of course, the Justice Buster takes a tumble. Overall, I do like the look of this figure, and I like the way he does actually have the means to balance on his own, probably by using that smaller display stand that I thought I would have just written off altogether. Why were we even going to use a display stand this small? But yet, sure enough, it was good, and it really was the right size to allow this guy just to get a little bit of additional balancing that he wouldn't be able to have already. The figure has some really cool details. Not the heaviest of figures around, but more than makes up for it with the details and, again, the articulation that they pack into such a cool-looking bot like this. What do you guys think of Justice Buster? Let me know down below in the comments section. Could you guys see yourselves picking this figure up for yourself? Let me know in the comments section. Big thank you once again to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide the sample of the Batman Endgame Justice Buster that we could have a look at in this review. If you guys enjoyed this video, want to hit it with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing, and you certainly do want to stick around for more, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and turn on the bell notification. Of course, as always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.